Thank you.
Great. All right. So yeah, this is actually my first opportunity to do like a real outreach presentation since I started in this job. So I I had some ideas of what to come with. I basically ended up doing a very broad-based presentation so that my understanding is that representatives from this department last spoke with this group back in around 2019, so pre-pandemic. I was not a manager at that time. I was a zoning specialist, so I was not part of it. Jessica Hanscom, who was part of it and is our department director now, was there. So she was able to fill me in a little bit with some notes that were taken of what was of interest at that time. And I think we can all say a lot has changed since 2019 in a lot of ways. So, like Addie said, this is sort of a very basic overview of what's going on in the last 3 years right now. Definitely some information on sort of the biggest issues that we come across with trying to get permits out efficiently, both from our side and what the public can do to help with that. And so if there are more in-depth topics that people want to get into and we don't have time during the Q&A, I'm sure I'd be glad to come back, or somebody else here that has more expertise in whatever the topic of interest is. So this is the scariest part of presenting, is trying to share your presentation. So let's see if I succeed. Is it visible?
It is. It's perfect.
Great. So just a really quick background on me. My name is Christina Stacy. I'm the permitting manager. Most people call me Chris. I took this role in May of 2021. I replaced my predecessor was Carrie Willett, who probably a lot of you also knew. Prior to that, I've been with the city since 2015 in doing zoning that whole time. So again, I probably had interactions with a number of people here for zoning things. Before that, my previous 10 plus years of experience were all with the state of Maine, partially doing zoning in the unorganized territories of the state, and then later doing environmental regulation with the DEP. So my whole career has basically been in government and regulatory process. And I say that because I'm not a building code expert. I'm more of a zoning expert. So I've learned a ton in the last year and a half about building codes in this job, and I continue to learn about it, but it's not my background. So if anybody wants to get into a really complex code question, I should probably connect you with one of my staff people. So that's about me. Assuming a lot of you are here because you've interacted us before or expect to in the future. I know a lot of people's experiences with us aren't always the most positive or have been challenging for a variety of reasons. That is certainly not our goal, but with a very large department, a lot of responsibilities, it obviously happens sometimes. And I hope some of you have had some good experiences with us too, but it's our goal to make things smooth, both for us and for you as much as we can. It's just a very complex program. There's a lot of different departments that interact with us that you also have to deal with. It can be very confusing for the public of what's going on. We understand the pressures everybody's under. Every time I talk directly to an architect or a contractor or anybody one-on-one, we always commiserate about we're all facing pressures just from different sides of the coin. I think we all know this has been one of the most challenging environments with just so much interest in development and doing things, and yet so much shortage in terms of labor, materials, costs. So we certainly do understand that. And You know, we view you all as part of our, we use the term customers, which always feels a little weird to me in the context of government, but it's just a shorthand for the people that come to us for help or permits or other things. You know, you are an important part of it. The other side of it, though, is that we are essentially what you would think of as a law enforcement agency. We are given laws by the state, by the city council, sometimes even directly by the voters when there's a referendum. And that's our responsibility, is to the public overall and what they want us to do. And that's what we're trying to do when we're doing things here. And obviously, I think we all know the biggest purpose of this department is public safety, you know, preventing injuries and death before they occur by making buildings safer. So that's always the first thing we have in mind. It's something everybody here is extremely passionate about. So sometimes when things get heated, know that it comes from a good place. People just really, really do care about keeping people safe here. And that's sort of where we're coming from. So I've been here since 2015, like I said. This department has been through a massive amount of upheaval in the 7 years I've been here. When I came here just as a zoning specialist, it was the busiest place I'd ever worked. I had never faced a workload here like I have here versus at the state. And it's only stayed that busy or gotten busier. We had literally probably about a third of the number of people back then, which added to the challenge. We now have a good full staff, which is making things better. We've had 2 city managers, 3 or 4 department heads. We got split off from the planning department. So literally just for the past 2 years or so, we've had a really steady management. Like Jessica has been in place for 2 or 3 years. Me and the other division directors have been in place for at least 1.5, 2 years. And although you don't all work here and see it, I think I can say from the internal side that it finally feels like things are sort of stable for the first time ever in my time here, which is helping a lot. So just a quick overview of the presentation. These are sort of the topics I put in. So just sort of an overview of like the trends, updates, what's been happening the last few years, what's coming up. A part about, to give you a behind the scenes look of what happens after you submit your permit. It's one of those things where when you work here, it seems so obvious to you what happens, and then you talk to somebody in the public and you realize how confusing it is for them. So just trying to lift the veil a little bit, if you will, and give you an idea of what's happening here when you submit something. And then a few tips for like the fastest review, and then hopefully we'll do some Q&A. So what is happening here? It's like I said, it's always been busy. It continues to be busy, or steady at least. Sometimes somebody will say to Jessica that like, oh, I heard you're not getting any permits anymore. And we laugh heartily because it's not true. This just shows the past 4 years or so. You can see that the number of permits, and, you know, obviously look at your y-axis there. It's not like it went from 0 to 10,000, but, you know, it's dipped a little in 2020, but it continues to kind of trend up or stay steady. The value of construction is interesting because I think some of this is just because costs are going up so much, but even that shows a little bit of upward trend of how much people are saying their construction is costing in the permits they apply for. So we've seen in the last 4 years, I'd say from 2019 to today, it's about a 15% increase in the number of permits that are being applied for. This next slide gives a little bit longer view in terms of permits issued. So applied for is important because every permit that's applied for, even if it never gets issued for some reason, somebody has to handle it here. But of actual permit issuances, those are also slightly trending up. And certificates of occupancy are fascinating to me because they bounce around so much. I guess it depends on if it's a 300-unit condo project or one school getting a CO. It's just a weird numbers thing. But So when you look at the number of permits that are applied for, it comes out to about 85 applications every week on average. About half of those are more trade type permits like electrical and plumbing. But half of them are permits that somebody actually has to do a code review on. So just to give you an idea of the number of permits we face. This is an interesting show of the kind of cost of permits that are going up in terms of larger permits, larger projects, because I think we can all agree we're seeing a lot larger projects in the last few years in Portland, probably the last 5 years or so. So permits that cost more than $1 million in construction costs have gone up a bit. Permits for projects that are more than a $10 million project, which are the biggest of the big, obviously. It's a small sample, there's fewer than 10 a year, but the number of them has definitely been slowly rising in the last 6-7 years. And the average cost of larger permits, the yellow line, continues to go up. So in addition to just numbers of permits going up, the complexity is increasing for us, which adds obviously to the amount of work we have to do. The really, really good news, which I don't know has completely gotten out into the world yet, but our permit turnaround times for this department have been drastically cut over the last year. Just this past year, 2022, and it's just 2 review groups, the Building Code Review Group and the Life Safety and FPA Code Review Group. But it's the days from when the application was considered complete and it went into their review queue to the date that they started reviewing. So what was that gap between when it went into their queue and when they were actually able to grab it and start looking at it? And you can see it's gone from like 20, 30 plus days, that's business days. So we're talking a couple months, down to less than 10 business days since about August, which I don't think I can even tell you how thrilled I am about this. It was literally our #1 complaint of slowness, understandably. And to make this dent in it, it's just such a huge achievement for us. So I'll probably say this about 10 times in this presentation. These are just the people I supervise. It doesn't include zoning. It doesn't include the planning department. It doesn't include public works, anybody else that reviews a permit. We don't control them. They're in other departments or other groups. So I'm only speaking to the 2 reviewer groups that I directly supervise. I can say that zoning is on the same wavelength as us, as if you will. They're at 10 days or less as well. The other departments I won't speak to, but I think they vary. So that is our very exciting news. Electrical and plumbing permits have always been about a 1 to 2 day turnaround. So those haven't changed. They're kind of an over-the-counter permit. So I kind of just laid this out to sort of show what the base number of days in this department can be expected to be, which is only a little piece of the picture. But our intake staff, who are the ones responsible for getting it to completeness and into review, they average about 5 business days. The technical reviewers in this department are doing 0 to 7 business days. So for just this department, from the date you submit your application, you can expect about 5 to 12 days on this side that have to take place before anything else will happen. Like I said, that's a small piece of the picture because we have other departments that we don't control, planning, historic, public works. And this doesn't include the time where things are back on the customer to get something. So when the intake people are looking at it and they see something's missing and they email you and it's been 5 days since you submitted it, and now you take 5 days to get that thing back to us, well, now it's been 10 days. Which feels like a lot to people. And so we get complaints where they're like, it's been a month, and you look at the numbers and you're like, yeah, but half of them were because we were waiting for things for you. So please keep that in mind that, there's a whole part of the timeline that isn't anything we can necessarily do anything about because it's not on our side. So that's sort of the basics, and it, obviously the things that slow things down are when the permit's submitted without everything we need, and then that delays things, or the plans aren't very good and we don't understand them and we have to go back. Those are really the things that tend to add a lot of time. This is just a little tip, I guess, trying to show you, a lot of you are probably familiar with this screen that's in the customer self-service portal that you apply for permits on. And when you look at a permit, you'll get this screen of where things are at. It's very pretty and it's somewhat helpful, but it's also deceiving. And I have another point on that later. But I will point out that you can see the different reviews that this permit is scheduled for. There's just HP is historic preservation. I don't like the abbreviations that are confusing to people. It's something we need to work on here. But zoning, there's a schedule date. Residential alteration, there's a schedule date. We're meeting or exceeding that schedule date at this time. Again, I can't talk to historic or anybody else and whether they're meeting their scheduled dates. So just so you know what you're seeing in that view of the portal. This is just a really quick sidebar. I focused this presentation on permitting because I kind of assumed that's what this group was most interested in. I could be wrong, but this is just a point to make that permits are not all we do here. We do a lot of other things. There's just general customer service, people with questions. We deal with the gamut from Joe homeowner to giant developer. Joe homeowner needs a lot of time and handholding because they don't understand code or how to draw things, or so even though those projects are small and should be quick, they take a lot of time sometimes. We have to deal with complaints from the public that our inspectors have to go out and look at. General public general service, like meeting with people to help them with things. These things all take time, and it's not busy just with permits, it's busy with like everybody needs things. So yeah, there's more to our story here than just the permit process itself. To get a project from idea to successful finish, there's inspections, there's special inspections, there's reporting back to us, there's certificate of occupancy procedures. So I'm focusing on a little piece here. I will mention with inspections, those have been going up quite a bit too, partially because of more permits, partially because we've added some requirements for inspections, like the new energy code. We have to do an insulation inspection now, which we didn't used to. I think we actually should have been doing them before, but nobody implemented that. So we've correctly implemented insulation inspections, which have added to the number. Inspections are still an area that's of challenge to us, which some of you probably are aware of. We used to be able to schedule inspections within 2 to 3 days of being requested. We're more like a week to even 2 weeks now, especially for big projects where we need multiple inspectors to be able to go. We did just hire a 5th inspector. We had 4 for the whole time I've been here. We just hired a 5th inspector to help bring that down and back into a reasonable number of days, but it will be months before he's fully trained and ready to go on his own. One inspector's only been here 6 months, so he's also very new. One of the biggest challenges is we only have 1 electrical inspector. We've always had 2 here historically. We cannot find any master electrician to work for city pay grade. So if you know like a retired electrician or somebody who would love to work even part-time, refer them to me. But our electrical inspector is extremely oversubscribed. It's the biggest bottleneck. We have a couple contract electricians that will help on occasion, but their ability to help is limited. So just because of their own time limitations. So it's very challenging, but please understand it's for a real reason and one of those labor things that everybody's facing. So just to go over some things that have happened over the last few years, that have been pretty big changes for us. The biggest one, which was quite a while ago now, was going to a full online permitting with the UnderGov customer self-service portal. Back in 2019, when you guys last met with this department, I think that was still an area of significant consternation, may still be, but I think people have adapted more to it, especially people who are professionals that submit permits frequently and have gotten used to it. It's a frustrating program sometimes for us too, but we've also gotten better at it. And so it will never be perfect or, anything like that, but it's overall really helped this department with minimizing the amount of like sort of secretarial type staff we need to like manually enter things, which was, I think, the city manager's goal in implementing it. And I mean, I think we all have to accept that the wave of the future is like online access, doing things online. So, and it obviously was a huge help during the pandemic to already have that set up and running. And during the pandemic, we moved almost everything we do to be able to be done by email, online, other things. This used to be a very busy office with walk-in traffic, realtors, researching things. That's all can be handled by email now. It's a lot quicker and more efficient. So that's been a huge change just in the time I've been here. Another big thing that happened in 2020 was that the voters of Portland approved what is called the Green New Deal. It was a referendum increasing the green building code requirements in the city's ordinance. It applies to publicly funded projects and increases the efficiency requirements for those projects. So if you're not working on like affordable housing, publicly funded type things, you may not have had to deal with it, but it's been a learning curve on this side to understand the different third-party certification schemes like LEED and what it means to improve over ASHRAE by 30% and how do people adequately demonstrate that to us. So those kind of changes take a lot of time for us to process, interpret, give people useful guidance on. So that was a big thing. Included with that was the requirement that we always use the most, I'm sorry, the fire station's nearby, so I apologize about the noise. I probably should have shut my window. Included the requirement for us to always use the most recent version of the energy code, the IECC energy code that the state allows. So when the state adopted the IECC 2015, but allowed the 2021 to be used as a stretch code, we had no choice but to adopt that. So that happened in 2021. It was a big leap because I don't think we had ever really totally enforced the old ones very well. But knowing that this was a voter approved referendum and that there would be public interest in it, we took it to heart that we really needed to try to appropriately implement it at this time. And it's, again, been a huge learning curve, probably for you guys as well as us. And we're starting to figure it out and be able to provide more useful guidance to people. But, day one of the code, we do not have all the answers. So we all have to kind of learn together. There's been a few more code adoptions, not as significant, like the mechanical code, which is fairly equivalent to the old ASHRAE. So that didn't present a huge challenge, I think, for designers and things. Plumbing code, electrical code were updated again, not super significant from a design side, but it always takes extra time for us to have to double check if anything changed when we're reviewing permits. So that's always a bit of a time sink. Last summer, we also started doing permit management meetings for large development projects. These are not to be confused with pre-construction meetings, PCMs, which are done by the planning department. These were just an effort to improve communication between the development team and the city team, like, I shouldn't say city team, just the permitting department team on large permits and projects. What used to happen was that we'd get to the day of the final inspection, nobody submitted any special inspections, and people always want their CO as quickly as possible. And we have to try to receive and review 100 pages of special inspections in one day. It didn't work well. It was frustrating for everybody. So we set these up to kind of have everybody meet everybody, know who the contacts were for both sides, and to sort of lay out, like, this is when we'd like to receive things, and have sort of more formal check-in points on those big projects to make sure when we get to the final inspection, we're basically ready to go in terms of the permit management side. If you participated, I think they've been pretty successful in just getting people together more and knowing who's who and what's going on. And it's a great chance to ask questions of us, of how something will work, or when do the sub-permits need to be submitted, and all kinds of things like that. On the topic of sub-permits, HVAC permits on these large projects, we've been trying to find ways to make life easier for the public when we can. It's always harder than it. I get tons of great suggestions from the public, especially big developers or companies that work in a lot of different cities and towns. And they're like, well, in this town, they do this and it works really great. And I'm like, that is a great idea. Let me write it down. But the reality of trying to implement a change with a large department, the whole outside world, the systems we have available to us, it's always harder than it seems. So I think, as I said at the beginning, we're always looking to make things better and improve things, but it can be harder than it should seem like it should be. So as an example, we've been requiring MEP plans with the main building permit rather than deferring review of those. It includes obviously all the HVAC plans. And then when people would come in for their HVAC sub permit, they'd be like, why do I have to submit these plans again? You already reviewed them and stamped them. And we agreed. So for these large projects, we're asking the subcontractor for the HVAC to just submit their spec sheets or cut sheets for what products they're installing, because we don't normally get that at the primary building permit stage. So it's a small example of, like, we got feedback and we tried to figure out a way to make things easier for the public and for us. Coming up is some new version of Energov, which you guys won't really notice, but we will, because it looks a lot different on our end. So there's going to be a downtime in January, assuming it goes forward, that you won't be able to get onto CSS. So just stay, we'll have an announcement on our website and stuff. We don't know what's going on with MUBEC, if we're going to get new I-codes in the next 1, 2, 3 years. We only know as much as anybody does with that for the most part. So more new codes coming is always fun. We want to try to make our checklist better, which I think was brought up at the last meeting with this group. They don't really match what's in CSS. They're very outdated. It's what I'm hoping to do this upcoming year. We're, again, just reiterating, we're always trying to understand things that could be better, or new technologies are coming down the pike that we need to have a policy around. So for example, there's a lot of interest now in offsite modular construction of portions of interior, like the inquiry I got lately was about bathrooms that get built offsite and just like plopped in apartment buildings, I guess. So understanding what we need to do for inspections and things around that are kind of the things we're looking at. So just a really quick overview of permitting, what happens when it gets here. I don't want to talk too much, I'm running out of time. I can't reiterate enough how much we don't control the whole process, that there's other departments involved. You can't submit your building permit until the planning department tells you you can, if it's a planning site plan project. So, you know, just saying that again, this is our whole department. The green is like the rental registration, housing safety, liquor licenses, health inspections. They don't play too much into permitting in most cases. But I just wanted to kind of just show a really quick thing of like the extent of our department and what's going on. I'm the red area. I oversee 14 people doing a lot of different things. We're trying to hire a middle manager to oversee the plan review staff, somebody who's good at codes. We'll probably be posting that in February. So if you know a great candidate who might be interested, please tell them. It's hard to hire. This, I'm just showing who does what. So those 85 permits a week that come in, 2 people take care of them. Every morning they come in, they see what's submitted, they open it up. If it's the wrong permit type, they have to get in touch with the customer to like void it and resubmit it. They have to make sure the planning department is okay with this coming in if it was associated with a site plan. They have to do a completeness check. And then if it's all complete, they invoice it and it goes into actual review. These 2 people are certified by ICC as permit techs. So while they're not plan reviewers, they do have some basic code knowledge. You know, and their whole goal is to try to get your review to go faster by having everything that they know is going to be needed. So if they email you and they say you're missing this, that, and this, take it seriously because they're trying to get you to a good place to have a quick review. They use the city checklist, the permit checklist as their guide of what needs to be included. So if you're not using the checklist or you've been like, I've done so many permits, I don't need that anymore, go back to it, make sure you're really including everything it says if you keep having trouble with intake. Once they're done, it goes into review to everybody in the city that is going to review it. So if there's another planning review, if there's a historic review, building code review, zoning, it goes into everybody's queues at the same time. This is just a quick example of why we ask you to submit all your documents in one PDF file and all your plans in one PDF file, because this is what the permit tech sees on their side. If you submit every single document as a separate file, they get a list like this, and they have to download it and collate it all for you, which takes a lot of time. So that's why they're like, can you put everything into one file? Once it goes into review, these 5 people are the ones that report to me directly that do technical reviews. So there's 5 building code plan reviewers and 2 NFPA life safety plan reviewers. They each do their own review. They know things about each other's programs, but the formal reviews are separate. So if things are compliant, they sign off. If they're not compliant, that's when you get the dreaded resubmit required request. Once everybody's signed off, especially these 5 building code plan reviewers, they are sort of the admin for getting the permit out for the whole city. So they make sure all the required sub-permits and inspections are included, so you know what you need to do when you get your permit. They stamp the plans and they issue the permit. They tend to answer a lot of questions about, I'm having trouble uploading. So they're busy with like customer service tasks in addition to code review. Again, this is just trying to show the sort of backside, front side of things. And this is a point of confusion. So this is what the customer is seeing for this same permit and what we're seeing on our back side here. Building construction review is awaiting happening. It looks like just one thing's supposed to happen. Well, on our side, 3 people are happening in that line, and you don't know that as the customer. There's a building, a life safety, and public works all in that one building construction review line. So it's an, the system is really great for some things. It's also limited because it's like an enterprise software that we can only alter so much or do so much to. So frustrations like that can be common. This is a little demonstration of what we see with when we get resubmits. So the commercial alterations review line on the left, that's in red, it failed. It was not compliant and they couldn't approve it. It got approved on version 2. There can be 4, 5, 6, there can be a lot of versions if we're not getting what we need. So in an ideal world, we do one review, you fix what we asked, we sign off on the second review. This is a bit about too how important, I know one of the biggest frustrations with Energov is uploading things back in when you're resubmitting. It's for a reason that we asked for you to do it a certain way. It's because if we have bits and pieces all over the place from different dates, to try to collate that into one final packet for stamping at the end, it's very challenging. So you're supposed to resubmit the whole packet again with the corrections, with nothing missing. So we don't have to try to like pick page A from here and page 22 from here and, you know, put it all together for you. So the right hand side kind of shows the versioning of every time a new version is submitted, it becomes a new version and the old one sort of goes away. So to make things faster, just a few quick tips. The biggest tip I have is that we rely on you providing us the information we need to make sure it's meeting all the codes. The purpose of permitting is to make sure the codes are all addressed before you start building, so that we don't show up halfway through and there's been a very costly mistake because, you know, the inspector discovers something and you have to change it all. The permitting is both good for you and for everyone in that we're trying to fix those problems ahead of time. So your plans and your submissions, they're communicating to us what you want to do. So if you think of them in that frame and that we don't know what your project is, you're familiar with it. You've been in depth with it, you know, all these things. We're just getting pieces of paper. We don't know all that background in most cases. So having it in an understandable way on paper is sort of the basic goal of us being able to do a quick review. It's a communication tool. It should be distilling complex info into the most understandable way you can think of for an outside party. When we have to dig for information, when we have to get out the measuring tool to start measuring things, it takes time. So key plans are awesome, especially on complex buildings, but even on more simple buildings. Knowing where we are in the building is really nice. It's also great for historic research. You know, when I used to be in zoning and I'd be researching, you know, what was the previous uses of this unit, and all you have to go by is like backside of building and there's 3 units back there. It's horrible. So that's an example of tell us where you are. Don't forget life safety plan. People forget NFPA and life safety a lot of times, and then our life safety plan reviewers are sad because they don't feel cared for. So don't forget your life safety plan. Don't forget NFPA reviews. I think this is the #1 thing I'll bring up is your code review or summary sheet. These are just little snippets of a couple really good ones that we got. So I have the full versions, but literally they went through the whole project and made sure we had every piece of information we needed to understand the plans. And if there's something weird in the plans, we could jump back here and be like, oh, that's why they did it that way. So you cannot go really overboard on your code review or code summary sheet. It's not that the reviewers don't dive into the plans, but it's a lot less time diving into the plans when it's listed out here. So think about that as something to improve potentially. All the major code things, you know, what code versions are you using? If we see you're still using 2009 or yeah, some, you know, 2009 or something on the energy code, we're going to already be like, oh, what version are they using? Is that just some old template that they didn't update? Occupancy classifications, building type, height, story area limitations, your occupant loads. Don't forget life safety and NFPA separately. Again, don't make the life safety people sad. Egress and exit capacities, all those things, having it laid straight out is so helpful. I can't even express. Energy code, again, pay special attention because it's new to everybody. If you found some code section you're using that might not be common knowledge, mention it. Did I say don't forget life safety? If you need to list things separately, for each, that's great. It's actually really helpful for them. This is just reiterating, please present complex information in the most understandable way you can think of. This was the main med edition, and it has horizontal exits and smoke compartments, I think. And, you know, they just labeled everything so clearly to figure out what's going on. What are the occupant loads of the different areas? Where are the refuge areas, et cetera. It really helped the reviewer understand it quickly and not have to go back and forth a million times. So, conclusion, use the checklist, be detail oriented in your plans, and remember somebody's looking at it who's never looked at this project before. Pay special attention to the energy code, submitting it in the proper format to PDF files. When revising, resubmit it in the same combinations as the originals. Respond to all the markups. I can't tell you how many times we get only half the markups responded to, and then it's like, why? We have to send it back again. So go through all the markups and make sure you've addressed all of them. Watch out for things that you change that affect zoning and planning. If they've already reviewed it and now you're changing the facade or a height thing, it's got to go back to them. That takes time. So be cautious of that. Be thoughtful about phased occupancies and occupancies during construction. They can be pretty complex. We want to know about it upfront, if possible, during permitting. There's nothing worse than being a month out from the project being done and then finding out, oh, we just want the second floor to be occupied. And then we have to figure out how it'll all be safely occupied with construction going on around it. I know there's the reality of issues with supply chains, et cetera, but just things to think about. So that was basically it. I hope that gave you sort of an overview of our perspective, what we're trying to do, our challenges. And, you know, I think just in conclusion, codes are something that it's a legal obligation, not something to try to like get around or an obstacle. It's something that as a designer, especially you're trying to pull together what your client wants and what are the legal requirements into one piece. And that's basically what we're trying to do here. So that's it. I'm happy to answer questions in the time we have left. And I'm happy to stay late too, if people want to stay late, because I clearly not doing a lot of presentations, don't have a good sense of how long things take. So
Thank you. That was exceptionally thorough. You can also, if you exit the screen so we can see everyone,
yeah.
Would be helpful too if everybody put their camera on so we could see everyone. And I just want to go over, Jim Reinerston had a quick inquiry about the IECC. There's a PDF on your site that gives links to everything. And yeah, so I just wanted to answer that. I sent him the link, but I'm sorry.
I will quickly say about, I don't remember when now, 3 to 6 months ago, they updated our website. It changed all the links. So any PDF documents that we have, links may be broken. It's also on my list of things to fix. But if you're struggling with one, feel free to reach out to me directly to figure out where you're supposed to be looking. And apologies.
Great. Thank you. And everyone, I can also put your email address. I'm sure many of you have her email address, but I will put it in the chat, and then with a follow-up email with this recording, I will send it out as well. We can do regular questions rather than typing in to the sidebar, because coordinating that and keeping track of that, I don't want anyone to lose the opportunity to ask questions. So, and yeah, Patrick and Julia, take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Addie. Thank you, Christina. It was a very thorough presentation, and I had a lot of questions, and like a lot of them have been answered via your presentation. So I think that honestly, it's probably a matter of opening up to anyone else that might not have been covered in the presentation. And so I guess just if you have something to ask, feel free to have the floor.
Yeah, and if you'd like to post it in the chat too, rather than raise your hand, feel free to do so either way.
Is everyone just stumped?
I know this is usually a very talkative group. I'm
It-
looking at
Well, I
everyone.
would say that, yeah, I think the longest, I mean, it all comes about timing. And I know from personal experience that I have seen an improvement in the timing of permits. And so, and seeing the kind of data that Chris has shown, showing this, the drop, it essentially brings it down to a more reasonable time frame for us to plan around. You know, back when it was 50 days for life safety, that was early in that graph, earlier in 2021, it's simply just not tenable. So it's nice to see that the city has made great strides to improve those timelines, because it helps moves out the reliability of the process to essentially everyone. And we don't want people to not want to build in Portland simply because it's onerous to go through a permitting process. That's one thing we definitely do not want to have happen. And so, like, to have those improvements made, you know, very quickly post a worldwide pandemic is very appreciated. Suppose if no one has any other questions, I'll have one.
Julia
Julie,
does.
Julie have?
No,
Great.
you can start, Patrick. I'll jump in with the next one.
It's probably a hard thing to answer. You know, a lot of it has to do with resources, probably a lot of it out of control and budgeting and taxes and stuff like that. But what is the tenor in terms of the departments about revisiting the ability to offer higher wages for folks in budgets forthcoming in future years? Because you know, granted, you have found some stability, it seems, in the permitting department here, but how is there thoughts about how to mitigate future kind of issues, in the sense that there's like influx of building construction, but it takes us, you know, 2 years to get legislation in place, or whatever budgeting fiscal years in place, so that you can actually be fluid enough to address those?
Yeah, I have some insight into that, but not as much as, say, our director would, who attends like the upper, you know, the leadership meetings and knows a bit more. I mean, surely it's an ongoing source of challenge for us, that we're not able to offer pay to staff that is probably commensurate with what the job requires. I think a lot of places are in this challenge where all of a sudden inflation spiked and things happen that is making people's paychecks go less and less far. And there seems to be like an applicant candidate shortage in general. Most of the staff here are actually union represented. So changing their pay on a dime is not possible. They get 3-year contracts usually. They just approved, most of the staff there and the one here just approved their most recent one that I think was retroactive to just this past July. So we have 2 to 3 years before anything can happen with staff level wages. That plan review manager position that I'm going to be posting, which we posted back in the late summer and didn't really get much of an applicant pool for. That's not a union job, but there's also a management pay scale, which can be changed more easily by city council, but it's not enough to attract what the job requires, in my opinion. It's just very challenging. I mean, luckily we have a lot of people who are very public service interested here. It's not just about the pay necessarily for them. And I do not have very good insight into the long-term vision of like HR and the city manager. I think it's been challenging with having an interim city manager who is just sort of holding down the fort until a permanent one is hired. So it's hard to, I sense it's hard to make a lot of progress on big vision, strategic things like that in this last year with that, in that setting, I guess.
Right. Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Understood. I have a question that's related to the permit management meetings you mentioned, but also kind of has to do with the, overall topic of communication. And I really appreciated hearing the timeline on the update of the website, because I've sort of been noticing that in bits and pieces and being like, when did this happen? And in some ways it's been really improved, and in some ways it's just been remapping my brain to know where to look for things and find things. But is there sort of anything that's posted that lets people know sort of like the threshold in terms of, either project size or budget that kind of triggers when those permit management meetings happen?
I don't have it in front of me. I think on we made like a policy sheet about it.
Okay.
I believe I'll have to double check after this. I believe it says on it the types of meetings, types of projects that we try to do them for, but I'm not positive. I can look at that and email it to you. It's a little bit at the discretion of the plan reviewer. If they're saying there's a lot of special inspections and complex things, they're going to probably want to do it anyway. And it's interesting now that we've been doing them for over a year. A lot of the big teams have been in one, and I think we've gotten a lot of the word out about what we want to get the word out. And so whether they're as important going forward, I don't know, but it's been an experiment, and the intent was, new commercial buildings of any kind, significant commercial additions, massive renovations like the Mercy renovation, the old Mercy Hospital renovation, we did one on. So that's the kind of things we've been doing it on. I will just say too, like it may not have felt like it the last few years because we were so busy and backed up, but now that we have some breathing room, we have more time to sort of have preliminary talks with people and things. There's sometimes limits on how much info we can provide without like real plans in place, which is a sort of boundary we have to explain to people. But in terms of just like an architect coming to us with, I'm doing this project, I'm a little stuck on the interpretation of this code thing, reach out with those. Like we have a little more time now to really talk about things. Same if you're just like, I don't think this project normally triggers a permit management meeting, but I'd love to have a meeting just to go over some questions I have now that the permit's being issued. Like we're always happy to try to accommodate stuff like that as best we can. So don't hesitate to email me if you have a special situation or a question or anything. So.
Great. There's one question that came in regarding sprinkler drawings. Are they now requisite for building permit issuance similar to electrical and mechanical design docs? Thanks, Tony.
My understanding is no. And this is where I wish I had a couple of my staff here that actually do reviews, but my understanding is that sprinkler drawings can wait for the sprinkler sub permit. So I can double check on that if you want to email me. I always get worried about, I'm pretty sure I know that, but no, my understanding is that those tend to get designed a little later and can be submitted with the sub permit.
And Steve asked a question about pre-application meetings. Do you think that those are facilitating smoother and quicker permitting reviews? That you sort of just answered that to some extent, but
yeah, well, it mentions pre-application meetings, which all these different things. I assume they're referring to the actual pre-app meetings that happen before you even get to site plan sometimes, like those very early ones. So I'm not sure which one they're referring to. The permit management meetings, again, they've only been in place for about a year and a half. A lot of the big projects are still in construction. So I guess I don't know for sure yet. And the whole idea was that we'll see how it goes and continue to refine the process as needed. But we're getting special inspection reports on a regular basis throughout the project, which is a huge win for us to not have to have a crunch time at the end. So initial signs are good. If the pre-application meetings was part of the question, those tend to be more very general informational kind of things, not to be taken as any kind of approval for anything. So I'm assuming they meant PMMs, not pre-apps, but if they want to write back, that's fine.
And I just want to take a minute to be mindful and thank everybody for attending because we've just crossed the 1 o'clock threshold. And Addie, I don't know if, I would be free for another 5 minutes or so if people have further questions, certainly to continue
as well.
if Christina's available.
Yeah, and for those that do have to go, if you want to type either in the chat or via email, if there's anything that wasn't answered or you want to see continued in a deeper discussion, you know, the event that Christina was talking about right before COVID hit, we actually had all the department heads in mechanics at the same time. So there was a lot more questions about process and the lineup and the scheduling. So I, you know, as you were talking, Christina, I kept thinking, wow, it's interesting that no one from planning is actually on this call because they usually just automatically attend anyway. So just keep that in mind. And if you can think of other topics, let us know. So thank you, everyone. And yes, I can stay on. I can stick with this for at least, yeah, at least until.
Great. Thanks, Addie. Marika, I think I saw
Yeah.
your hand up.
I know everyone's dropping, but this is for Christina, so hopefully you can help. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good. I just have a question about, sort of related to Julia's question about the mechanical plumbing permit timeline. How does that change in terms of if you're doing a project design build potentially, and you have your building permit documents ready for your architecturals, sort of as we've done in the past, but based on your project schedule, your mechanical plumbing are not done yet, but you're still looking to apply for a building permit to meet your construction timeline. Are you still allowed to submit for building permit without those two things? Or how, like, I just am curious because that's an approach that's used pretty heavily in this
Right.
area.
Right.
And I can see that having a pretty big impact on project schedules if that's not allowable
Yeah.
anymore.
It's an approach we're trying to get away from. Yeah,
Okay.
if right now we're saying you're supposed to submit it all together. I know it's been a big change for people and it adds more planning time ahead of time to have everything ready at the same time. Again, I wish one of my technical plan review folks were here to better sort of express.
I believe that the city does accept deferred submittals. It's in the IBC for that sort of specific thing.
We're not for full mechanical or plumbing plans. Our read of the code is that the deferred submittals are really only supposed to be for certain elements of things, like a truss design or a smaller element, not the whole HVAC system or not the whole plumbing system. I'm sure we could argue about what that code says, but that back when Jeannie Bork was still here, we went over the whole thing, and that seemed to be the interpretation of the technical staff here. And that's why we're trying to get away, because we did traditionally allow deferred submittals on those. The plan reviewers were having a lot of challenge with fitting all the pieces together in their review when it comes in months later. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, these chases are all different than what they showed on the architectural, you know what, I don't know if that's a good example, but because I'm not a plan reviewer, but so, you know, our understanding of working with like, for example, Safe Built on third-party reviews, they expect everything at once. And so for a large project, that's why we're sort of moving to, we really need to get all these together and not defer. So I know it's been a huge change and people have mostly adapted, but if you haven't done a project in the last 6 months to a year, it will be a new thing to sort of deal with.
And just a quick follow-up to that, how is there clarification in the documents online that also clarify how the cost for those fees are now calculated? Because typically the costs related to mechanical and plumbing are paid for by the subcontractor, not the owner or the developer. And by moving those documents into the building permit, it then shifts potentially that cost. What's the protocol on that?
So that is actually on my to-do list to revisit. It last was visited back when Carrie was the manager.
Okay.
And I think the general idea is like, we're not trying to double charge people for the cost of the HVAC at stage one and then again at the sub permit stage. So we're generally pretty open to like, don't include that cost up front, make sure your person applies for it.
Okay.
You know, it does it. So, you know, electrical is weird because it's by fixture, not by cost. So that's sort of a separate thing. But it comes up, it just came up in the last week, somebody asking basically the same question of how to do this. And I'm like, it would be good to sort of write something a little more formal to make it clear. But the bottom line is we're not trying to like squeeze you on both ends or anything.
Yeah,
So
no, and that wasn't my question. It was more of just
Yeah.
like knowing when
How to
I need
do
to
it,
plan
yeah.
for paying that cost.
yeah, you can always
Very
reach out
different timing.
to me, but I think bottom line, I would not include HVAC on the main building permit
Okay.
and do it with the HVAC. The plumbing and electrical is by fixture later, so
Yep.
that's a part I don't, maybe it's something to get input from you guys about, of like, are you including the electrical and plumbing, like labor costs in that? You probably technically are supposed to, but it's a, I don't know. Something
guess-
to figure out, yeah.
That's a really interesting topic unless somebody has another pressing question, but
Well,
you know, like
Steve-
I know
Steve
that the
has his
state
hand
fire
up.
marshal, oh, sorry, Addie.
Steve has his hand up. Steve,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry,
Oh.
thanks. There it is. Hi,
Yeah.
Steve.
Hey, I agree, Julie. That's a very interesting topic of conversation. I just wanted to follow up on the question about, I was the one who asked about the pre-application meeting. And I really was referring to the pre-app meeting as a way of kind of familiarizing your staff with a project coming down the pipeline. And if you've seen internally that initial kind of, if you will, meet and greet or get to know a project helps when it does land on your desk for permitting.
I would say yes, a bit. I think the hard thing is they're so limited. They're only half an hour usually. There's all different departments attending and, you know, it's going off in different directions. So it's a good like intro to, oh, that something's coming, you know, flagging some major things for the designer to keep an eye out for. But it's so limited in terms of like how much information we can give the person or how deep into like code questions we can go. So they've been doing those as long as I've been here and longer. And the intent was always just to, yeah, be an introduction, have a chance to ask some initial questions, give some initial feedback. But people often take them as like, I got word in my pre-app that this was going to be okay. And that is not what's supposed to happen in those. So, so yeah, I wouldn't say they've significantly changed things. I think it is just helpful to sort of know things are coming down the pike and be able to say like, oh, don't miss that this is a 4+ story and you're going to need an elevator, or those kind of little things more frequently. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. I guess I'll just go back and ask just in terms of the fee structure. The state fire marshal's office has made some adjustments to the way they register their fees. And is there any possibility that it would be more tied to project size and type versus the actual cost? Because in some cases we have projects where we don't actually even know what the final budget is going to be until we know what the city is actually, you know, particularly on some like existing
Yeah.
alterations, until you know what the city, you know, what's going to be approved ultimately.
Right. So I don't know if this partially gets back into the whole, there's other departments like planning, which has their own fees. And so I don't know if that's part of what your sort of question or concern, area of concern is. Because I know they charge sometimes on like time used basis and stuff, which we don't do. Ours is very straightforward, that it's, except for the electrical and plumbing, which is by fixture. I think pretty much everything else is by cost of construction. I see debates amongst building code people about charging by square footage versus cost of construction and sort of what you capture with that and what you capture with the other. I haven't researched it in depth myself. We've used this system for forever and to do a whole scale fee schedule change requires city council approval. So I don't think anybody's ever really brought up, like pushed, like, oh my gosh, we should revisit this and really look at investigating different options. It doesn't mean that it can't happen, just it's not come up in my time here to really delve into that. So I don't think that's much of an answer, but I know there's different ways of doing it and they have benefits and negatives for each.
But as for the cost, I mean, it's not like when we put the application, it's really the best possible estimate we can provide at the given
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, if it ends up being $1 million more, then no, I don't know if anyone's coming up to make someone pay the difference or not. But I mean, I guess
Yeah.
that's just really
I
just
will
to be
be-
reasonable.
Yeah, I'll be honest, we mostly take things at face value. I will say if somebody says they're adding 2 apartments to a building and it's only going to cost $6,000, we're going to
Right.
question you. But
Right.
if it's within a reasonable range, we accept what you've given us. So for what it's worth, and if it looks lowball, we're going to ask you about it. So, yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions that they want to ask? Thank you for everybody who stayed on with us. And Christina,
Yeah,
just
thank
reiterate
you.
everybody's thanks for your presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys, and reach out anytime if we want to talk again.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and again, any other ideas of further topics, different topics, other departments, we are, mechanics is one of our great programs that, again, I miss seeing everyone in person. So we can gauge interest and intimacy based on the topics. But this is also very convenient. So we will likely keep this format within subgroups and sub meetings with the in-person. So thank you, everyone. Have a brilliant holiday. Enjoy the holidays chaos. And yeah, I'll send this out probably either this afternoon or tomorrow as a recording. And it will be on our YouTube channel. So thank you. All right.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you, everyone.